thanks for joining me. I know that I got a bunch of new subscribers yesterday, so first of all, welcome and thank you for following along. So for anybody that's new, the whole goal here is to have each day of our coronavirus social distancing thing, I'm going to just share out a little tidbit about something technical with a camera, something not technical that you can look into and explore in just playing with a camera and working on photography, and sharing it out each day so that folks who have a camera at home can get that camera out and get away from screens and away from all the hustle and bustle and just enjoy some creative time. So yesterday we talked about Aperture, and if you didn't see that video, the Aperture video, this one on shutter speed, and then tomorrow's on ISO are a trio. And if you're not familiar with those three things, you'll want to watch all three of them. If you are familiar with all three of those things, you may want to listen real quick to see if you catch anything new, but you also may want to wait and just pick up in 2 days when we move on to other things off of the exposure triangle. So I just mentioned the exposure triangle, so there basically are three ways that a camera controls how much light comes in to hit the sensor. And you need the right amount of light to hit your sensor in order to create an exposure. So that's really the nuts and bolts of a camera. If you look at the camera that I learned on was an Argus C3, which was a real standard old-time camera, probably from the 60s or 70s or whatever, maybe even the 50s. But it basically had just a couple of controls. It had aperture and shutter speed, and then you could buy different film speeds to put in there. They put more silver particles on the film, which is what reacted to the light in film. So basically, our digital modern cameras do the exact same thing, but in place of the film, there's a little electronic sensor that reads the light. So Aperture was the one that we talked yesterday. That's how much light comes through the lens by the blades in there. Today we're going to talk about shutter speed. So shutter speed is, I think, probably the most concrete one of the three. Everybody seems to always catch onto it the fastest. It's literally how fast the shutter opens and recloses. So it's basically the speed of the snapshot that it's taking of the world. And so the majority of the shutter speeds that you're going to work with are actually in the fractions of a second. So if you are looking at shooting birds in flight, let's say you want the wings to be frozen and all of that, you might be at 1/2000th of a second or 1/3 or 4,000th of a second. Very fast shutter speeds. On the opposite end of that, if you wanted to shoot a star trail, you're out at night and you want to get if you've ever seen those astral photography photos where you get the North Star in the photo and then the stars all kind of spin around it, that might be a 30-minute exposure. So you have an entire range and you handle that through shutter speed. Again, kind of if you watched my video yesterday, it gets a little bit tricky to talk about how you find that control on each camera body. They're all slightly different. But you probably have spinning knobs and dials, and you will probably, and a lot of times they're not labeled. And a lot of times you can actually reprogram in the menu system to reassign them to different places if you have a particular preference on where they are. The way that I have mine is my thumb on this spinning dial here is my aperture control, and then this front one is my shutter speed. And then the third one that we're going to talk about tomorrow is ISO, and I have that set up on this spinning dial. So basically, when you're controlling shutter speed, you want to start to think about how fast of a shutter speed do I need to capture the thing that I'm shooting. Do I want to freeze the motion, or do I want it to be blurry? Sometimes a blurry photo can be awesome because it's showing the motion and the motion blur that's going on. And that can convey a really neat look. Now, I guess it's probably wise to talk about the difference between motion blur and handshake. So when you get below a certain point of shutter speed, the actual minuscule little movements that you make are going to blur your image because no human being can hold a camera perfectly steady beyond a certain length of time. And that actual line in the sand where you're no longer able to hold it steady, it's going to depend on several things. One is how steady your hands are. If you have super steady hands and you didn't drink any coffee and your heartbeat isn't going, then you may be able to get away with a slightly slower shutter speed than if you are all excited, you just ran up a hill and your heart's pounding a little bit and you're excited because you see a bald eagle and you're getting ready to shoot it or whatever. And so it all depends on a whole bunch of variables. But a really good rule of thumb is you probably don't want to get much below 1/80th or 1/100th of a second in your shutter speed to handle just not having any shaky hand stuff in your picture. Now that's a little bit of a moving target too if you're using zoom lenses. If you're getting into focal lengths, and we'll talk about that on another day, but if you're talking about long lenses that pull things in close to you, think for a second about having a set of binoculars up to your eyes and you barely move and the image inside the binoculars is moving all over the place. Well, cameras work the exact same way. So if you have a longer lens, that little bit of movement is going to be amplified and it's going to make more motion blur just by absolutely tiny little hand movements. So a good rule of thumb for longer lenses is to make that focal length your minimum shutter speed. So if you're using a 300 millimeter lens, make 1/300th your minimum shutter speed. If you're using a 400 or a 600, make it 1/400th or 1/600th. And it'll definitely put you at least in the neighborhood of what you need. And then you shoot some and look at your photos after you're done shooting. And if everything is blurry, if even when you think you hit focus, you didn't get a sharp picture, you might need to just bump your shutter speed up a little faster. With photography and with any art form, trial and error and learning is the name of the game. That's the fun part. So just solving puzzles and figuring out what works. Now, when you get to slower shutter speeds, and there are some times when you're going to want a long or a slow shutter speed for something cool. A real standard one is to capture moving water over a period of time. A waterfall or a stream flowing. If you do a multi-second exposure of moving water, you get a really cool look. The problem is you can't handhold that. It will need to be on a tripod. So if you don't have a tripod already, I can make some gear recommendations. I actually, on this channel, there are a ton of gear reviews. Some of them are a couple years old, but that gear is all still out there and you can explore through there. Or send me a message if you need help finding something at a certain price point. Happy to point you in the right direction. While we're talking about a gear thing, just very quick little interruption. The state of Pennsylvania, where I'm located, just passed a rule that businesses have to shut down. And right now, some of my friends in the camera store world, over at Cardinal Camera, aren't even sure they're allowed to do online business yet. They're asking for that clarification from the state. Once we know if they are able to do online business, it would be awesome if folks could pop in there and maybe you need a tripod or you need a new memory card. You've decided that you want to try a new lens, whatever it is. Even though you're going online, try to shop local. Try to get your local camera store. If you're not in the Philadelphia area, if you're somewhere else, get in touch with your local place or call in and offer to, give them a credit card number over the phone and have them ship you the piece of equipment that you're looking to get. This is going to be a hard time for everybody. Photographers are right in the mix of people that are having a heck of a time. A lot of people are. So just my little soapbox moment to keep it local and try to support your local business. So when we talked about aperture yesterday, we talked about aperture priority, which is the A on your setting dial. Shutter speed on most systems is an S. On Canon, it's T. Yeah, their nomenclature is TV, which is time value, which is so annoying, but I guess it's a pet peeve. But it's just shutter priority. It just is labeled with a T. So if you go to the TV, and not the television, the TV setting on your Canon, or the S on everything else, that will give you shutter priority, and then one of your controls is going to control your shutter speed while everything else is programmed by the camera. So the assignment for today is to play with shutter priority. Set it into shutter priority, send the kids out playing with a ball or riding their bikes or whatnot, and experiment on what it is like to go with a very slow shutter speed and create blur, or speed it way up and freeze motion. A little pro tip here with dealing with the shutter speed: when somebody's in motion, the extremities are the thing that is moving the fastest, the tips of their fingers or their toes. So if you zoom in on the picture to the bottom of the feet or to the tips of the fingers, whichever is moving fastest on the person, you're going to get your best sense of whether you have successfully stopped motion enough. So if you're shooting a soccer player and they're running down the field and you're shooting it at 1/400th and you zoom in and you look and their feet are blurry, maybe you needed to be at 1/640th or 1/800th or 1/1000th. It just depends on how fast the motion is and what you need to freeze it. So that's our little like go out and shoot it assignment for today. So moving on, we're going to talk about leading lines. Leading lines is when you look in a composition and you find lines that are somehow guiding an eye toward a subject. And I will drop in a handful of different examples over top of this audio so that you don't have to keep looking at me. You can actually maybe see some pictures instead. But the idea of working with leading lines, I guess probably one of the most stereotypical ones would be that curving road that curves through the scene, and then maybe somewhere on that curve as it's kind of going toward the vanishing point, you have a person standing there, and that person is your subject. And so you're aiming at the subject, but there's a line of an element in that photo leading the eye right to that person. And it obviously doesn't need to be a person. It could be a race car going down a hill, or it could be anything in the world. It's sky's the limit. But the idea of seeking out those lines deliberately, any kind of element that is kind of verging into the picture, and you can put then your subject on that line and have it kind of like lead the eye in there. That's a good thing. And it can create a really compelling image. So our little non-technical thing for today is to try to find leading lines. Maybe you have sidewalks around your house that you can get you there, or something in your backyard, a tree limb leading into something, or well, then now it's on you to go find those things. But photographers look for those all the time. So that's it for today. I hope that you find something in here to dig out and enjoy. Keep your mind occupied and to at least take a little break from all the news and the scary stuff. And have a great day and go create.